Hello, debt warriors, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. I'm your host, Katie Fada. Veterans Day honors military veterans of the United States Armed Forces, and it's celebrated on November 11th each year. Veterans have served our country. However, many veterans have found themselves facing a plethora of financial difficulties. Many veterans have even found themselves facing housing difficulties as well. Today, we're discussing financial and housing strategies for veterans. Bruce Buckley and David Ramirez join me on today's episode. Bruce is the Chief Executive Officer at Soldier On, and David is the Home and Credit Education Program Manager at Soldier On. Soldier On is a nationally recognized nonprofit organization that partners with the Department of Veterans Affairs and other agencies to provide veterans with shelter and support in an environment that offers dignity, integrity, and hope. Soldier On's ultimate goal is to provide formerly homeless veterans with permanent, supportive, sustainable housing. Bruce, David, and I discuss PTSD, homelessness affecting veterans, predatory lending, and much more. Now let's get to my interview with Bruce and David. Hi, Bruce and David. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Katie. It's an honor to be on today.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about financial and housing strategies for veterans because Veterans Day is this month. So to get started, let's talk about the key to improving the financial stability of service members and veterans is financial education. What are the main financial challenges veterans commonly face after transitioning to civilian life?
So I'll start just by giving a little overview of Soldier On as a nonprofit that works with veterans who are homeless and at risk of homelessness. And we have a lot of different programs. We've been around for 30 years and we build permanent housing. We have transitional housing. We have an extensive outreach programs in 4 states, including where you are in New Jersey. We work in 9 counties in New Jersey. And really, we've been doing intervention in trying to end homelessness. And about 5 or 6 years ago, I was fortunate to meet with some folks at Freddie Mac who helped us by funding us to do more prevention of homelessness for veterans. And, you know, what that became was our financial literacy program, which David runs. David's taken it from an idea and turned it into a very vibrant, robust program it's not just for veterans in Soldier On, but for veterans all around the United States. And I'll let David take over with a lot of the specifics because it's what he does every day. But I think there are many financial challenges that veterans take. And I think the more we talk about the program and what it does and who it impacts, more and more of that will come out. But I think the main challenges are, to really oversimplify not a simple issue, is the fact that the military really doesn't prepare you for life after the military. And David, who's a veteran, can speak more personally to that. In addition to that, housing is a crisis in the United States that we're all very well aware of. And then I think there's a lot of figures from mental health issues and other issues that a veteran might have that comes from their service in their experience protecting this country, essentially.
Yes, no, thank you again for including me. I'm a United States Army veteran, and one of the things that we see once we started this launch of our financial literacy program a few years back, one thing I could share for you, for a lot of military service members, the transition into the civilian world is one of the most challenging things you're ever going to do when you leave service. And I could explain why. So many people that come into the program, they're dealing with a lot of different, some could be mental issues. Biggest difference that we see, and Bruce would tell you this, they just don't have any family. They don't have a good support system. And that really is key. So I'll tell you about most of our transitions. One of the workshops that we do, we always ask our veterans, how much money did you have when you got out of when you got out of service? Did you have thousands of dollars in your bank account? And, we get a lot of chuckles in the room because, again, we're on fixed incomes while we're serving. And those fixed incomes, what happens when you're in service, you get your clothing, so when a veteran gets out of the service, now they have to buy clothes, wardrobe. That's stressful, believe it or
Yeah.
not. And, medical expenses, it's all taken away in some cases. And I think one of the challenges that we see a lot with our veterans, and Bruce just said this, is that when we transition out, we don't really do a good job of serving our veterans, servicing out of where to access their benefits. And that's
Right.
very key. I mean, I spent 15 years purchasing my own medical insurance when I never had to, if I would have been educated properly. So we talk about medical, we talk then housing. We're sheltered while we're in the service. So that's another expense. And if you've been through inflation, you've seen the inflation impacts after COVID. I mean, everybody's making life decisions at the grocery store. Everyone,
Yeah.
everyone. And so you take away these things, and then we had to restart our career. And so the other thing that we see, we talk about challenges, there's employment challenges. A lot of our veterans are not going to have the skill set. You're not going to be able to put them into the civilian world. I have a neighbor who just retired after 20 years. One of my neighbors, after 20 years in Marines, went through 4 or 5 different jobs in the last few years. And here I'm thinking, man, you're in leadership and things like that. And then the other thing I told him, I was like, man, you went to all these great places. And then we talk about the transition, right? Well, I can enjoy California. I was on a fixed income. So remember that when you see our service members, and why we say thank you for your service, because it is a sacrifice when they're out there serving the country, and it's even much more difficult when they go into the real world.
And in the real world, we need financial education, and a lot of the service members are lacking financial education. So how can this be harmful for veterans?
Well, many impacts. I just said about all the loss of the support that we get when we're in the military. And when you're in the military, it's mission first. Mission first. So when you get out there without some good financial education, resources especially, because what we find out, a lot of our veterans, we ask the same question: how do you learn about money, right? And you really learn it from the household of who we grew up with. And what you find out with a lot of our veterans, they might not have that good support system at the household. So what can we do better differently? Well, one thing that we're doing within Soldier On, we opened up a free national hotline where any veteran, military, and their families, because again, we can't just work with the veteran. This is a household issue. So anybody in the household can receive free financial counseling. And so the impacts are very real. Some of our veterans don't know about their spending habits. So we talk about, if you don't have financial education, you're not aware of your spending habits. We have veterans that are buying, sodas at $3 a day, and then in a month you look at their expenses, they're wondering where all their money went. And then the other thing, the inflation is real. We get annual increases if you're a veteran on disability, maybe once a year. Sometimes they're 2 or 3%. What has inflation been the last year? It's hard to live on a fixed income. So not budgeting properly, not having the right financial coach overviewing that or overseeing your finances gives you a different opinion. And it really, at the end of the day, creates opportunity, because every veteran has some really great benefits, and it goes into the VA home loan. I just read a statistic out there. There's 85% of veterans not using their VA home loan. How crazy is that? So that's for real why we don't have financial education in every veteran community.
Not only does a lack of financial education affect veterans, but also 7 out of every 100 veterans will have PTSD. So how does having PTSD and other mental health issues affect veterans' ability to be financially stable?
Well, I think the world that we work in, what is the homeless veteran? What is the veteran with usually some pretty serious struggles who find themselves homeless or at serious risk of homelessness? PTSD, mental health is a real limiting factor, because I'm no clinician, so this is talking more as just someone that lives in this world every day. It's very hard to concentrate. It's very hard to focus. It's very hard to settle. And, anybody, all these issues, especially financial, require a certain amount of math skills if you're going to do it by yourself. And a lot of individuals that leave the service or in the general population don't necessarily have the skill set. They don't have access to the right tools that they need. And I also think what we see a lot is this sense of pride that many veterans rightfully have earned, and they have, but it also can prevent them from asking for help. And often what we see is they talk to the other veterans who they're more comfortable with at times, who really don't always have the answers, but are willing to offer up their version of an answer. And often until you can get the right professional in there, whether it's mental health or financial help, you're kind of swimming upstream to reach the veterans. And PTSD, again, is really touches not just their whole life, but every minute of their life. It doesn't go away for a couple days and then come back.
I think mental health is real. No matter if you have PTSD, anxiety, depression, and if we look at all the financial stressors on top of that, what it does for the veteran, social withdrawal, relationship difficulties. We see that a lot, and things like that. So it becomes a wave of different things that you have to deal with on top of financial stress. And what I could tell you, it's real. I'll tell you a quick little story. This is one of the best examples I could tell you about people that are struggling and feel like they don't have the right support system. But I went to go do a workshop over a year ago at one of our new sites, and so many people applied to get in there. Only a select few were able to live in this great community with all these support systems. And when I went in there to do my financial workshop, there was one veteran who was in the room deceased for 2 days. And when you go through the unit, I'm thinking to myself, wow, these are beautiful. They have, your washer dryer, you have the best view of the city. But think about that, there's something real going on there. And so that's what really hits why we need to have these good support systems. The other thing is that what we see in our shelters, and I'll just add this really quickly, is that it's real easy for people who are dealing with PTSD and anxiety and depression to be preyed upon. And that's another thing we see at our shelters. We have military veterans who are giving a good portion of their disability check to fake relationships online. So again, as a community, we need to do better with our support system, and we have a peer-to-peer supported system. So it's good to have communities like that where other veterans, like Bruce said, may not have the answer, but how can I deal with it? It's like we're being in a foxhole together and sharing battle buddy stories, and it's very effective.
I think the other piece that we see a lot are the men and women, the veterans that are in our program, that the VA, for example, does have a lot of financial resources. It's got a ton of benefits. It's really a great, necessary organization, but it is one heck of a bureaucracy. And a bureaucracy means you get juggled around on phone calls from one person to another. It means you sit on hold. It means you wait in line. And that's something we're very, very much involved with the veterans, because they'll just hang up. They'll just walk out of line. They'll just say, the hell with this. I'm out of here. And PTSD and the anxiety and other mental health issues really make it difficult even to get through, where you and I might, moan about waiting in line for 45 minutes, but they just say, I'm out of here. And then the other piece I'll add that I think historically has been a negative that has changed in the military is they've promoted smoking cigarettes, for example, and they actually used to supply cigarettes. Well, cigarettes in Massachusetts, if you want the good stuff, I think are 12 or 14 bucks a pack. And on a limited income, that's a lot of money. And that's also something I see. They're in line, they're anxious, there's no smoking, and they say, I just got to go have a cigarette. And it sounds like sort of overly simplistic, but those are the real day-to-day struggles that we see that really do provide a barrier to a lot of things, including financial improvement and financial literacy.
I mean, buying the things like cigarettes or things that they don't necessarily need can mean that they kind of lack an emergency fund. And it's true that 40% of veterans have less than $500 saved in an emergency fund. So why do veterans lack an emergency fund, and how can veterans go about creating one?
I think one of the best things that we've been seeing within our program, we started a culture of financial literacy. And one of the things we've done is share those success stories with other veterans. So it doesn't matter what type of budget you have, there is a solution. And we have our financial workshops where we just start with the basics. I'm happy to report, like every month I get our council report, and we have veterans who've never had a credit report now have credit score, now have a credit score, and that's real. And then having those little conversations, just not focusing on just that one task, not everything else, right? Because it could be
Mhm.
overwhelming. So with our program, since we launched it, I'll give you some examples. One veteran who lives in Beaumont, Texas, who actually came from New Jersey and called our services because his credit was real low. He's a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran who just got evicted. Never thought he was going to use credit before, and just going through the motions every month. So we talk about spending habits. We want to just focus on one thing, but with his success story, it's something that could create more opportunities. He's now in a 2-bedroom apartment,
Oh,
got
that's
a
good.
new auto loan. So we just focusing on that one thing, and what we do within our in our program, our counselors will call you monthly or quarterly. We'll make sure that you're reaching your action plan. We'll put you on an action plan, but we'll make sure you're hitting your financial targets and offer other suggestions for solutions. Others, stories I can tell you with just starting with a savings plan. Your people are not aware where their money's going. We put a lot of money in subscriptions with Netflix. All those different services. The cigarettes, the soda spending. Once we can really handle like that whole budget, I mean, it's amazing what veterans can do, and once they start saving, and a lot of times when they start working with our counselors, we're doing their income ratios, things like that. So one that we had a few years ago, Jerry, after his second one, another person who got evicted during COVID, didn't want to go to shelters. He was with his wife, and after his second counseling session, redoing his budget and savings, we told him he was VA home eligible, at 130, and he almost fell out of his seat. And he, after reigning for 25 years. So what hurts is what we don't know.
And I like that you just touched on credit, because I wanted to talk about that next, how veterans can build or rebuild their credit after leaving the military. Because you mentioned that a lot of them don't even have credit. So that's a lot to do after you leave the military. Start from scratch.
I would suggest this: go to any HUD certified counselor. Go to HUD website. HUD certified counselor. Look that up. Google that.
Mhm.
Start getting. Everybody has financial literacy curriculum. Every lender. So if you have a Wells Fargo card, whatever big banking, they have financial curriculum. But if you want to take that a step further, what I suggest, again, we have a great national hotline that's supported with counselors that are HUD certified, and any veteran could call 1-888-288-3184, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. You could get a free credit report analysis. We will put you on an action plan. And this ain't a one-time shot thing. This is continuously. We have veterans that have been in the program for 4 years. Again, it's always another financial goal. It's a moving target. But when you empower people with the right knowledge, and as veterans, we have a lot of perks with the VA home loan. Once you start educating them about real estate planning, people don't think that they're going to be homeowners after 50 or 60. Well, I'm happy to report the last 2 years, we've had over 70-year-old homeowners, veteran homeowners for the first time. So
Yeah.
anything is possible. And then, a lot of things, if you're out there and you're listening and veteran out there, I just like saying this. I'm going to say a bad word, the B word, bankruptcy. I'm going to say the F word a lot, finances. It's okay. Let's talk about it. And if
Yeah.
you don't have nobody to talk about, we have the right support system for you. And you could call a counselor anytime. You can call me, and we'll get you there. We'll get you there, because we believe there's plenty of resources that could help you.
I was just going to say, it's pretty common for me. I'll be meeting with a veteran who's in one of our buildings in one of our programs, and we'll just be talking. And the financial struggles or situations come up, and it's very common for me to call David with the man or the veteran on the phone with me to say, you got to go with this guy and he'll help get you fixed. And to echo what David says, we've seen a lot of veterans in our program, not including all the veterans that didn't come through other Soldier On programs, buy homes. In New Jersey, in our Tinton Falls building, a gentleman, Melvin, who came to us with credit issues, some real struggles, a great guy, probably 70 years old-ish, I'm guessing, bought a house I think he moved in 6 months ago, not far from our building. and he still comes to the building regularly. He's still part of his life. And, it's just one of many stories that are very real. And we were able to help Melvin with his moving expenses, and just that's why we exist. And I think, we can talk big stories, but David or myself can talk a lot of individuals that better represent the big stories with the real individual experiences.
Yeah, I love that you guys are touching on the home ownership for veterans, because that's kind of what I want to talk about next. So let's talk about the number of homeless veterans is increasing. A staggering 15,507 veterans are living without any shelter at all. Are veterans at higher risk of homelessness than non-veterans? And if so, why?
Veterans have always been at higher risk than non-veterans. I think I'm going to say back to the Revolutionary War. I'm not sure if that's true, but I know going back, centuries, decades, that's been the case. The VA in the Department of Defense never really owned it until 1994, when they funded a program called Grant Per Diem that we still utilize every day to run a veteran for immediate shelter for veterans who are homeless. And I think the reasons that veterans are homeless are many. The impact of military service on an individual creates the mental health issues, creates the loss of community, because so many veterans now you see rejoin because they get out after their service and they don't feel connected. And what David mentioned earlier, homelessness is it's not the result of mental health. It's not the result of substance abuse. It's not the result of financial difficulties. They all are contributing factors. But I think any three of us on this call would never find ourselves homeless. And why is that? Because we have a support system. If David Ramirez in Texas called me up and his world fell apart, I'm not going to let him be homeless. I'm thousands of miles away in Massachusetts. So I think that's what you see with a lot of veterans. They go into the military for a variety of reasons. They get out of the military at often a random location without a lot of resources. And if they don't have a support system waiting for them, they wander out and try to go into life. And I think that's always been the case. And then you multiply that with all the other struggles that we've talked about, and they almost leave the military homeless, because the VA or the military isn't making sure you've got housing when you leave the military. That's on you. So think of every veteran leaves the military homeless. Many have a home, many have a family, a wife or a husband, and mother and father and support system, and many don't. So right out of the gate, they're climbing up a steep hill right from the moment they leave the military.
So lack of support is obviously a reason why veterans are homeless. Is there any other contributing factors that increase in homelessness among veterans?
Well, again, I think the mental health, I think, all of those factors, couple with that turns into lack of support. So I think the specifics of what contribute to lack of support is a bigger conversation, because, not everybody leaves without a home. Not everybody leaves with PTSD. Not everybody leaves with these issues, and they have other solutions. But I think that, that's one of the reasons. And I also think a lot of individuals join the military, as I said, for a variety of reasons, some of which may be they don't like school, they don't like education, they didn't do well, they don't fit in, they get in trouble with the law. So they're often going in at risk and they're getting out at risk. So they enter the military at risk. And the military is a temporary solution to their kind of vulnerability, but it's what happens after. And David probably has some more thoughts than I do.
No, well said, Bruce. And I could, I can relate that. I think another part of the issue as a veteran is the stubbornness. Is when you're doing that service and you feel like you're giving all that time, and then the way you transition out, that's the last place you want to go back for help, if that makes sense, right? With any VA. And so I see that a lot. And one of the most common things that I hear with veterans who finally have that, the light at the end of the tunnel, or they, you know what, now I need to make the change. And a lot of them really tell you, quit being stubborn, because the help's everywhere. The help is everywhere. But to Bruce's point, if you're dealing with all these things, I live in Texas, far away from the Northeast, but a lot of our veterans don't show up to these great support service communities. And why is that? Why is that? And so I think we need to do a better jobs in communities, of really helping those veterans, whether it's either taking that extra mile. We don't have a lot of good transportation services. That's another struggle for the veteran. They get anxiety just going through the trans system, things like that. So they're wondering why they're not showing up for these appointments. And I just think overall we need to do better, organizations across the country, and trying to find out how we could go to the veteran instead of the veteran coming to us. Whether and Bruce could talk about that. Our transportation services, we have case managers meeting veterans under the bridge on porches. That's innovative way of thinking and making a change, because if the veteran sees you're trying to help them, then they're gonna listen.
Yeah, I didn't actually think about that lack of transportation, but that makes sense because we don't have a great public transportation in this country in general. So that I wouldn't even think about that, but that's a good point to bring up.
Well, it's frustrating. I've been to the VA. I was an appointment 2 years ago, and it frustrates me because I'm going in there and they have markers where you can't cross a certain line where the receptionist is, and I'm thinking, man, these people served our country, and I hear the staff asking, man, nobody shows up, and well, why don't y'all get innovative? Like, why don't y'all hire get a van, get a veteran to drive it like we do, that's going to talk to them on the way over there. There's a support system. We can relate instead of being stressed out and being in a car with strangers. You got to be better. You got to think better, especially for our veterans who've done so much for our country.
Kind of earlier talked about the VA, so let's go more into that. Can you explain what the VA loan programs are and how veterans can take advantage of it?
Overall, I think does have a lot of great resources, and a lot of veterans don't know about them or don't take advantage of them. You also see veterans that had a relatively more traditional life, and then something happens in their life when they're in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 70s, whatever. And I think reconnecting or initially connecting with the VA for a lot of benefits, including the mortgages, is really a process that I think the VA could do better personally. I also think leaving the military, there's a real disconnect between the Department of Defense and the VA at a real governmental level that should be better connected, that people are automatically enrolled in and you have to opt out, or whatever ways you can address some of that gap that occurs.
Anybody in the country who wants to get information, they get this free downloadable financial booklet. And it tells you a real quick overview of the VA home loan overview, but the benefits of the VA home loan, right? Here's some of the best benefits. It's reusable. It can be used over and over again. It's flexible. A veteran can have more than one VA loan at a time. And I love really talking about that one, because when we do workshops, I had one of our first participants in the program. He had former bankruptcy, and he was going through a hardship as well with a divorce. And within over a year session, he got out of bankruptcy, became a homeowner. And every time we talk about his story, not only that, he has another VA home loan. And so a lot of veterans don't know about that benefit. And his original home, he rents out to his nephew. And so it's a great story of what you could do with the VA home loan and create more net worth, generational wealth. And so the other things, there's zero payment required, no private mortgage insurance, and the VA loan is assumable, so there's a death or anything like that. And a lot of other great benefits, but I could send you this link. It also talks about the VA home loan program history. When it was enacted, it was signed into law back in June 22, 1944, the meaning of the guaranteed loan, and then also how to apply for a VA home loan, what you could expect from the loan processing, the closing, and then the most important thing, what veteran asks, what are the requirements, right? So every eligible veteran who has available entitlement, they'll have to go to a loan officer, or they could come to our organization or get with our hotline. We could direct them, but they'll need a certificate of eligibility, which the VA has on va.gov. So I hope that gave you a good overview, highlights of the VA home loan.
Yeah, I'll make sure to include that link, that booklet in the bio of this, the description of this podcast. And I was going to go off something that Bruce mentioned earlier, that many veterans aren't aware of these VA home financing benefits, but why don't they know about them?
Well, I think, the answer is, how would they know about them? I'll throw it back as a question, just throw it out there. But how would you know about them? Someone has to tell you, you have to read it, you have to see it, you have to look for it. And I think you also need to realize the disconnect, like David mentioned, can be, I want to just put the military behind me and get on with my life. And that really is, the psychological attempt to just turn off something that might have some negative connotations to you, but it also, you're turning off the positive connection. So it's, how well publicized is it? Where is it publicized? How is somebody going to know? I think they often find out from talking with other veterans who have taken. It's sort of a word of mouth process. I'm not saying there's not advertisements. I'm not saying there aren't attempts, but I really think it's not thrown out there. And I'll go back to what I said earlier. When you leave the military, I think there should be, you have to take a 2-day course in the VA of what benefits there are and what's available. And David can better speak to how is exiting the military, but how much education is there to the veteran that is 1 day out of active service?
I would agree, and I'll tell you one personal story of mine, and this is why there needs to be more programs, just as the one we have with Soldier On, where it's accessible, in every community. When I first got my first home, I trusted the organization, the lender that I was working with. You build relationships, but it's a sales environment, and the jargon could be very scary for any homeowner, very scary. And understanding how a mortgage works, the principal, all that jargon could be very intimidating. And so my first home, not once, they knew I was a veteran, not once did they ever present a VA home loan product to me. And and so I got a conventional loan, low interest rate. The numbers, I guess my income looked great to them, but they weren't pushing the best product to me. And then I had disability. I wouldn't have to pay the funding fee, yada, yada. So, again, it's not well known if you don't have that good support system. I was the only veteran in my family, first time homeowner. So I didn't have other veterans to ask about. But I tell you what, once I first started getting knowledgeable and getting educated, I have quite a few friends. It's veterans supporting each other. It really is, because they're not opening up their phones to the VA news, things like that. They're not looking on television. They're dealing with other things right now. And if you're a veteran, you have an old battle buddy like I do, I call him from Mississippi. Hey, talk about these benefits, because I think that's where we're really going to make a difference. And talk about that VA home loan. Tell the veteran you're going through a lot. It's not all about you. I have to tell a lot of my veterans about this. It's about your family.
Yeah, and then I was going to kind of go off that and talk about predatory lending, because many veterans are susceptible to it. So can we talk about predatory lending and what it is and how veterans can protect themselves?
I'll start with that and then let David pick up. But we see it in our buildings all the time. Mm-hmm. The first permanent housing building, essentially an apartment building for veterans, which we build a lot of now, we didn't furnish the units, and we learned that was a mistake. Why was it a mistake? Was, first of all, they obviously don't have a lot of financial resources. So we saw very dangerous side of the road furniture. We saw bed bugs and other type of stuff in furniture. And then we also saw the rent-a-center furniture that is, to me, predatory, where they go and they buy a couch and they put $39 down, and that couch will ultimately cost them, I don't know what, $1,500 for a $500 couch or other furniture. So I think that's one example. I also think the credit score thing is they go and they want to buy a car, and you can buy a car, but the interest rate isn't going to be 7 or 6% or whatever it is now, or 9%. It's going to be 24%. and they buy a lesser car than they could afford if they had a better credit score. And then they end up having to pay for repairs. They end up not being able to keep up with the car, with the insurance. So I think systematically our country has a lot of predatory, legalized predatory systems that I think need to be at least the light shined on them better. And I think additionally, as David mentioned earlier, this may be a little off topic, but it's predatory, is we have a lot of veterans get scammed. And in our program, I had one guy that was scammed on something on his TV, and it looked like it was Amazon, but it wasn't. And he lost like $8,000 in this process. We also have loneliness, as I mentioned before, and lack of support turns into, I hear this a lot, I've got a girlfriend on the internet. And to this guy or woman, it is a real girlfriend. They're often quite beautiful when you see their photographs, and they're just vulnerable. And, I think we see that type of stuff a lot. And it's just, they're ready to be preyed on for their weaknesses. And we see it, anybody living in the streets. So if a veteran's homeless, all the practices out there, many of them are just predatory. Whether you've got $1 to lose or $100, they're losing it to whatever scam individuals come up with. So I think there's a lot of that, and David can better tell with his knowledge and experience.
Just going with Bruce said, it happens a lot. We're very vulnerable. You have a lot of veterans, a lot of medication, dealing with these different anxieties, depression, whatever the case may be. So they're very vulnerable. And one of the things that we feel good about when we start providing these wide variety of support services, and when they do get into our financial counseling program, we have a few veterans, no kidding, they just don't have anybody. They're over 70. Every time they get that kind of call, hey, you owe us money for this, or they call our counselor right away. And it's a great conversation. I don't mind having those every month to avoid them losing some money.
We also have in our program here, where the veterans reside with us, we have several veterans who work for us who are Social Security rep payees that connect with aging or vulnerable veterans, and we help them manage their money. And it's a very, it's a very process-driven way to do it. They have to be certified. You have to report to Social Security periodically. And the VA also has fiduciary designations for individuals that help veterans. We just had a conversation this morning about one of our Social Security rep payees who's worked with veterans for 20 years for us. This guy lives in one of our buildings, and he just caught up on his rent, and he was pretty far behind a year ago. And, for a lot of veterans, that means eviction. It means, we're not going to evict because of that. But what we did was we intervened with this type of a support system. So, there are solutions, but the problem exceeds the solutions right now.
And, I think that's true for anyone with lack of support. You're all more susceptible to the financial scams, predatory lending. So it's good that you guys are there to help if anyone needed help. And of course, I'm going to link Soldier On in the description of this podcast as well, so everyone can get that there. But my last question, just any advice you would give to veterans who are struggling financially or struggling with housing insecurity?
So if you're struggling with housing and you're a homeless or at-risk homeless veteran, anywhere in the country, we're primarily located physically in the Northeast, but our number is 866-406-8449. That's 866-406-8449. And we can offer a solution that we provide, or we can connect you to other providers like us that can help someone really start to improve their situation. And then I'll let David talk about the, his program within Soldier On. And I'll repeat the number maybe.
Yeah, no, one thing I could just advise, any veteran out there who went through a transition, and one of the most important things is that a lot of veterans, one thing I didn't mention earlier is that they're discharged. Sometimes they have misconception. Oh, I got out with a general, not an honorable. I don't qualify for these benefits, things like that. So they live off the grid. I know the VA, who issues all the disabilities, GI benefits, and things like that. We have over 130,000 veterans who are off the grid, meaning that they just send checks to them. So they have to pay for money orders, things like that. So wherever they may be, they need that housing assistance. These fixed incomes ain't cutting it. So they're somewhere out there in our communities. If they're listening, again, educate yourself. Walk into a VA hospital, even though you don't want to. Get a federal benefits book. They're everywhere. Any VSO out there. Know the terminology, especially SSVF. I never knew that after 15 years out of the service. Support services for veterans and families. And then the next thing, Google the city you're in. Find those organizations that could help you. And then lastly, our programs open throughout the nation for active service members. Again, we want to be proactive. We don't want these service members getting out and, oh my God, I got to build up my credit score now to get a home. Let's do that while you're in service. Let's help you with that savings plan, the budgeting, making those right decisions before you deploy. And that's another thing with predatory lending. When I was in, there was lemon lots on every base. There was those rent centers, high interest rates. Let us educate you. And what's great about the program extends to the family. So when I was deployed, my wife was taking care of the finances. We have different ways of viewing that. So it's okay to have a financial coach to mediate that in the center. So again, our line's out there. It's 1-888-288-3184, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Standard Time. And also we have soldieronsuccess.org. If you don't want to talk to anybody, we get it. Schedule your appointment. We'll call you at your convenience. So God bless you, and thank you to all our veterans and active service members who are serving our country today.
David, thank you for your service. And Bruce, thank you for joining me today, too. You guys provided some very useful information for any veterans out there, active military members, family members of veterans. So thank you guys again for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you,
Thank
Katie.
you, Katie.
Thank you. Soldier On is an incredible resource for veterans, and David and Bruce demonstrated why. If you're a veteran struggling with homelessness or finances, reach out to them for support. You can get all the information we discussed on today's episode in the description of this podcast. I want to take this time to thank David and all veterans for their service. With that being said, that wraps up another episode of Millennial Debt Domination. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us there. I'll talk to you next time, Millennials, Gen Zers, and everyone else listening. Bye.